Before recommending any economic system for the global economy, we have to strip the problem down to its foundations. Economics is often framed as ideology: capitalism versus socialism, markets versus states, growth versus redistribution. But at its core, an economic system is not a belief system. It is an allocation engine. It exists to coordinate scarce resources across billions of people over time under uncertainty. Any global system that fails at this task will collapse, regardless of moral intent. From an economic design perspective, there are 5 non-negotiable functions a global system must perform. These are not political preferences. They are constraints imposed by reality. 1. Scarcity management, not abundance fantasies. The first job of any economic system is to manage scarcity. Even in a technologically advanced civilization, scarcity never disappears. It only shifts. Energy, land, clean water, skilled labor, rare materials, attention, all remain finite relative to demand. A global system must therefore signal scarcity accurately, allocate limited resources efficiently, prevent chronic overconsumption in one region from starving another. This is where many ideologically driven models fail. Systems that suppress price signals tend to misallocate resources. Systems that ignore externalities tend to overexploit them. A viable global system must preserve informational signals about scarcity while correcting for their blind spots. 2. Incentive alignment across time horizons. Markets are excellent at short-term optimization, but notoriously poor at long-term stewardship. Firms optimize quarterly earnings. Politicians optimize election cycles. Individuals optimize personal utility. None of these horizons align naturally with climate stability, infrastructure resilience, or demographic sustainability. A global economic system must reward productive activity without encouraging extraction-only behavior, penalize actions that create long-term systemic risk, align private incentives with public survival. From a technical standpoint, this means embedding intertemporal constraints directly into the economic framework, not treating them as afterthought regulations. 3. Information flow at global scale. Prices are signals. Wages are signals. Interest rates are signals. The global economy already functions as a distributed information network, but it is distorted by asymmetric information, financial opacity, regulatory arbitrage, capital mobility without accountability. An effective global system must maximize signal clarity while minimizing signal manipulation. This does not require central planning of production. It requires transparent accounting standards, real-time data integration, feedback loops that adjust faster than crises propagate. From an economics perspective, this is a cybernetic problem, not an ideological one. 4. Risk containment, not risk elimination. Risk cannot be eliminated. It can only be redistributed or hidden. Financial crises, supply shocks, pandemics, climate events, these are not anomalies. They are features of complex systems. A global economic system must prevent local failures from cascading into global collapse, absorb shocks without freezing trade or capital flows, avoid concentrating systemic risk in opaque institutions. Historically, global systems fail not because of inefficiency, but because risk pools silently centralize until a single failure breaks everything. Any viable design must prioritize modularity and fire breaks, not just efficiency. 5. Legitimacy and compliance. No system functions without participation. A technically perfect model that lacks legitimacy will be bypassed, undermined, or overthrown. At global scale, enforcement is weak by definition. There is no world government with absolute authority. This means a global economic system must be perceived as fair, even by net contributors, offer visible benefits to most participants, Allow cultural and political diversity within shared constraints. Economically, legitimacy reduces transaction costs. Politically, it reduces defection. Systemically, it prevents fragmentation. The core insight of Segment 1. Before choosing mechanisms, markets, redistribution, automation, universal income, carbon pricing, digital currencies, we must define what the system must accomplish. From a purely technical economics perspective, the best global economic system is not one that maximizes growth, equality, or freedom in isolation. It is one that allocates scarce resources efficiently, aligns incentives across generations, preserves accurate information, contains systemic risk, maintains legitimacy without coercion. Only after these principles are established can we responsibly discuss how to build such a system. That is where Segment 2 begins. Once first principles are established, the next step is to confront an uncomfortable reality. No historically pure economic system has ever worked at global scale. This is not because humans are irrational or immoral. It is because simple economic models collapse under complex conditions. The larger and more interconnected a system becomes, the more its weaknesses amplify. From a technical economics perspective, both capitalism and socialism fail, but for different structural reasons. 1. The structural strength and blind spot of capitalism. Capitalism excels at decentralized optimization. Through prices, profits, and competition, it allows millions of independent actors to allocate resources without central coordination, discover efficiencies through experimentation, rapidly adapt to local conditions. In small to medium systems, this produces extraordinary productivity. But at global scale, capitalism exhibits three critical failure modes. 2. Capital accumulation and feedback loops. Capitalism naturally concentrates capital. Returns on capital tend to exceed long-term economic growth, a well-documented dynamic in economic literature. Once capital concentration reaches a threshold, feedback loops emerge. Wealth generates political influence. Influence reshapes rules. Rules reinforce wealth. At global scale, these loops become transnational. Capital moves freely. Regulation does not. The result is not free markets. It is market power without accountability. From a systems perspective, this creates fragility, not efficiency. 3. Externalities at planetary scale. Markets price what can be owned and exchanged. They struggle with what cannot. Climate stability, biodiversity, ocean chemistry, public health, these are non-excludable and non-rivalrous at global scale. In a purely capitalist system, environmental damage is underpriced. Future costs are discounted. Collective losses are nobody's balance sheet. The system appears efficient, until thresholds are crossed and costs become irreversible. This is not a moral failure. It is a pricing failure embedded in the mechanism itself. 4. Why global capitalism becomes unstable. At planetary scale, capitalism's strengths turn inward. Efficiency becomes over-optimization. Specialization creates brittle supply chains. Financialization detaches value from production. Growth becomes mandatory rather than beneficial. The system stops serving human needs and begins serving its own momentum. Economically, this manifests as recurring crises. Systemically, it manifests as declining legitimacy. 5. The structural promise and limit of socialism. Socialism, in its pure form, attempts to solve capitalism's failures by centralizing resource allocation, prioritizing equity over efficiency, eliminating profit-driven extraction. In theory, this allows for long-term planning, coordinated responses to scarcity, suppression of destructive incentives. At small scale, or under extraordinary conditions, this can work temporarily. At global scale, it fails for different reasons. 6. The information bottleneck. Centralized systems suffer from information compression. No central authority can process billions of preferences, rapidly changing local conditions, technological innovation paths. Prices disappear as signals. Decisions lag reality. Misallocations compound quietly. By the time shortages appear, correction mechanisms are slow, blunt, and politically constrained. This is not a failure of intelligence, it is a failure of information throughput. 7. Incentive flattening and innovation decay. When rewards are detached from outcomes, innovation slows. Risk-taking collapses. Informal markets emerge. At global scale, this leads to black markets replacing formal ones, bureaucratic allocation replacing discovery, political loyalty replacing competence. The system becomes administratively stable but economically stagnant until pressure forces collapse or reform. 8. Why hybridization is not optional. From a technical economic standpoint, the conclusion is unavoidable. Capitalism fails without constraint. Socialism fails without signals. At global scale, no single allocation mechanism can handle all domains. Markets are powerful information processors, but blind to externalities and equity. Central planning can enforce long-term goals, but collapses under complexity. The solution space does not lie in choosing sides. It lies in layered systems, where different mechanisms operate where they perform best. The core insight of Segment 2. The global economy is too large, too interconnected, and too fragile for ideological purity. Any viable system must use markets where price signals work, override markets where they fail, preserve incentives without allowing runaway accumulation, plan long-term without suppressing local intelligence. The question is no longer which system is best. The question is how to architect a system that uses each tool only where it is structurally competent. That architecture begins in Segment 3. Once we accept that no single economic mechanism can operate effectively across all domains, the design problem changes fundamentally. The question is no longer which system should we choose. It becomes, which allocation mechanism works best for which type of economic problem? At global scale, efficiency does not come from uniformity. It comes from functional differentiation. 1. The core design principle, mechanism fit. Every economic mechanism has a comparative advantage. Markets excel where goods are rivalrous and excludable. Preferences are diverse. Innovation paths are uncertain. Planning excels where coordination is critical. Time horizons are long. Externalities dominate private returns. Commons-based systems excel where resources are shared. Overuse is the primary risk. Community enforcement outperforms formal regulation. A global system must therefore be layered, not monolithic. 2. Layer 1. Competitive markets for non-systemic goods. The first layer is traditional markets, but constrained to domains where they are informationally efficient. These include consumer goods, services, most manufacturing, non-essential innovation sectors. In these areas, price signals remain powerful. Competition drives efficiency. Failure is survivable. Crucially, firms must be allowed to fail without threatening the system as a whole. At global scale, this requires anti-monopoly enforcement across borders, limits on firm size relative to systemic importance, bankruptcy mechanisms that work internationally. Markets work best when they are not allowed to become system-critical. 3. Layer 2. Regulated markets for strategic sectors. Some sectors are too important to be left fully to market forces, but too complex for direct planning. These include energy systems, telecommunications, transportation infrastructure, financial intermediation. Here, the system uses regulated markets. Private actors compete. Prices exist, but constraints shape outcomes. From an economic perspective, this preserves decentralized discovery, investment incentives, operational efficiency, while preventing natural monopoly abuse, underinvestment in resilience, excessive short-term optimization. This layer treats markets as tools, not as governing authorities. 4. Layer 3. Public provision for natural monopolies. Certain domains exhibit such strong economies of scale that competition becomes destructive. These include core infrastructure backbones, water systems, public health capacity, fundamental research. In these cases, public provision is not ideological, it is economically efficient. Attempting to force competition here raises costs, degrades reliability, increases systemic fragility. At global scale, this implies cooperative international institutions, shared funding mechanisms, transparent governance structures, not global control, but shared stewardship. 5. Layer 4. Commons governance for planetary resources. Some resources cannot be owned without destroying them. The atmosphere, oceans, biodiversity, orbital space. These require commons-based governance, not markets and not states acting alone. Economically, this means usage rights instead of ownership, hard caps instead of prices alone, collective enforcement mechanisms. Markets can still operate within caps, but the cap itself must be non-negotiable. This is where economics intersects with physics. 6. Layer 5. Social insurance as system stabilization. At global scale, inequality is not just a moral concern. It is a systemic risk factor. Extreme inequality reduces aggregate demand, increases political instability, encourages extraction over investment. A global system therefore requires automatic stabilizers, income floors, access to basic services, shock absorbers during crises. This is not redistribution for fairness alone. It is redistribution for macroeconomic stability. 7. Preventing layer collapse. The greatest danger in a layered system is boundary erosion. When financial markets dominate public goods, political systems capture market rules, commons are quietly privatized, the layers collapse into each other, and the system reverts to fragility. From a design perspective, boundaries must be explicit, enforced, adaptive over time. This is an institutional design problem, not a cultural one. 8. The core insight of Segment 3. A functional global economic system does not ask one mechanism to do everything. It assigns markets to discovery, planning to coordination, commons governance to preservation, social insurance to stabilization. Efficiency emerges not from purity, but from correct placement. With this layered foundation in place, the next question becomes unavoidable. How do we measure success in such a system? That question defines Segment 4. Once a layered global economic system is established, a critical question emerges. How do we know if it is working? Historically, the global economy has relied on a single dominant metric, GDP. While useful, GDP was never designed to guide a planetary scale system under ecological and social constraints. From a technical economics perspective, GDP is a throughput measure, not a health indicator. A well-designed global system requires multiple orthogonal metrics, each capturing a different dimension of performance. 1. The limits of GDP as a control signal. GDP measures market activity, not outcomes. It increases when natural disasters require rebuilding. Health crises generate medical spending. Environmental degradation requires remediation. GDP does not distinguish between productive investment and defensive spending, short-term extraction and long-term capacity building, value creation and value destruction. At global scale, optimizing for GDP alone creates perverse incentives that quietly undermine system stability. 2. Welfare metrics, measuring human outcomes directly. A global system must track human welfare independently of output. This includes life expectancy, health-adjusted life years, educational attainment, access to basic services. Economically, welfare metrics reveal whether growth is translating into improved living conditions or merely inflating balance sheets. These metrics help identify growth without benefit, technological gains captured by narrow groups, regions where market signals fail to reflect lived reality. Welfare indicators act as ground truth calibration for the system. 3. Distribution metrics, inequality as a system variable. Inequality is not a moral footnote. It is a macroeconomic parameter. Excessive inequality suppresses aggregate demand, increases financial instability, encourages rent-seeking over innovation. A global system must therefore monitor income distribution, wealth concentration, access asymmetries. The goal is not perfect equality, which would destroy incentives, but bounded inequality that preserves legitimacy and economic dynamism. 4. Resilience metrics, stress testing the system. Efficiency without resilience is fragility. Global economic health must include measures of supply chain redundancy, energy security, financial leverage, shock recovery time. These metrics reveal whether the system can absorb climate shocks, pandemics, financial crises, geopolitical disruptions. From a systems perspective, resilience metrics replace blind efficiency with controlled robustness. 5. Environmental accounting as hard constraint. Environmental metrics must not be treated as advisory. They must function as binding constraints. This includes carbon budgets, biodiversity loss rates, freshwater depletion, pollution thresholds. Economically, these are non-negotiable boundary conditions, not preferences. Markets operate within these limits, not above them. 6. Intergenerational metrics, accounting for the future. Most economic systems heavily discount the future. A global system must explicitly track infrastructure durability, debt sustainability, ecological regeneration rates, long-term human capital. These metrics force present decisions to account for future capacity, not just present consumption. This is where economics meets ethics, through mathematics, not ideology. 7. Composite dashboards, not single scores. No single number can guide a planetary system. The solution is a dashboard approach. Growth metrics, welfare metrics, distribution metrics, resilience metrics, environmental metrics. Trade-offs become visible. Conflicts between objectives are surfaced early. Policy becomes an exercise in explicit prioritization, not hidden optimization. 8. The core insight of Segment 4. What we measure determines what we reward. A global economic system optimized for GDP alone will grow faster, break sooner, legitimize extraction. A system optimized across multiple dimensions will grow more slowly, adapt more effectively, endure longer. With measurement redefined, The next challenge becomes governance. Who sets these metrics? Who enforces constraints? Who adapts the system when conditions change? That is the focus of Segment 5. Designing a global economic system immediately collides with an unavoidable fact. There is no world government, and there never will be one with absolute authority. From a technical economics perspective, this is not a flaw to be fixed. It is a boundary condition to be respected. Any global system that assumes centralized enforcement will fail before it begins. 1. The core governance constraint. Global governance operates under 3 permanent limitations. Sovereign states retain ultimate authority. Enforcement power is fragmented. Exit is always possible. This means compliance cannot rely on coercion alone. It must rely on incentive compatibility. A viable global economic system must make participation rational, not mandatory. 2. Incentive-compatible institutions. Incentive-compatible institutions align individual, national, and global interests without requiring trust in benevolence. This requires clear benefits for participation, visible costs for defection, automatic mechanisms rather than discretionary enforcement. Examples include trade access conditioned on standards, financial system participation tied to transparency, infrastructure funding linked to compliance. The system does not punish ideology. It rewards cooperation. 3. Modular institutions instead of central authority. Rather than a single global economic authority, the system relies on modular institutions, each with a narrow mandate. These include global accounting standards bodies, environmental constraint registries, financial stability coordination forums, infrastructure investment consortia. Each institution operates independently, shares standardized data, can be exited at a cost. This reduces fragility and prevents total system collapse if one institution fails. 4. Rule-based enforcement over political discretion. Discretionary enforcement invites capture. A global system must favor rule-based triggers. Automatic sanctions when thresholds are crossed. Predefined responses to violations. Transparent escalation paths. Economically, this reduces uncertainty. Politically, it reduces accusations of bias. Rules replace negotiations wherever possible. 5. Soft power as hard economics. At global scale, legitimacy functions as a form of capital. States comply not only to avoid penalties, but to access capital, attract investment, maintain currency stability, preserve trade relationships. Soft power mechanisms, reputation, trust, predictability, become hard economic forces. A system that visibly rewards stability and transparency will attract voluntary alignment. 6. Managing exit without collapse. No global system can prevent exit. Instead, it must price exit correctly. Leaving the system should be possible, be costly, be reversible. This prevents sudden fragmentation, weaponized disengagement, cascading failures. Economically, exit costs function like friction, slowing destabilizing moves without banning them. 7. Adaptive governance over static design. Global conditions change faster than institutions. Governance must therefore be iterative, data-driven, self-correcting. This means periodic metric review, automatic policy adjustments, built-in experimentation zones. The system learns, or it becomes obsolete. 8. The core insight of Segment 5. Global economic governance does not succeed by overpowering states. It succeeds by outcompeting alternatives. The best system is the one that lowers transaction costs, reduces volatility, increases predictability, delivers tangible benefits. When participation is economically rational, compliance follows without force. With governance established, the next design challenge becomes unavoidable. Money itself. How should currency, credit, and capital flow in a stable global system? That is the focus of Segment 6. If the global economy is a living system, then money and credit are its circulatory system. And historically, this is where systems fail. Financial collapses do not begin with ideology. They begin with mispriced risk, excessive leverage, and feedback loops that outgrow their constraints. A viable global economic system must therefore treat finance not as an end in itself, but as critical infrastructure. 1. The core financial failure mode. Modern financial systems consistently suffer from the same structural flaw. They privatize gains and socialize losses. Credit expands during booms. Risk accumulates quietly. Losses surface suddenly and spill outward. At global scale, this becomes catastrophic. From an economic design perspective, the problem is not finance itself, it is unbounded leverage without systemic accountability. 2. Money as a public utility, credit as a regulated privilege. A stable system distinguishes between money, a medium of exchange and unit of account. Credit, a conditional claim on future production. Money must be stable, predictable, boring. Credit must be purpose-bound, risk-weighted, constrained by system capacity. Treating credit creation as a public regulated privilege, not an unrestricted market activity, is essential at global scale. 3. Countercyclical financial architecture. Most financial systems amplify cycles. A global system must do the opposite. This requires automatic tightening during booms, automatic loosening during downturns, capital buffers that grow in good times. These mechanisms must be rule-based, not discretionary. Economically, countercyclicality smooths growth. Systemically, it prevents runaway cascades. 4. Capital flow management without isolation. Unrestricted global capital mobility creates instability, but isolation destroys investment. The solution is conditional mobility. Faster flows for productive investment. Slower flows for speculative arbitrage. Transparent tracking of large-scale movements. This does not require capital controls everywhere, but it does require friction where speed creates risk. Finance must move, but not faster than governance can observe. 5. Preventing institutions from becoming too big to fail. At global scale, too big to fail is not a slogan. It is a design failure. A stable system requires hard size caps relative to global GDP, functional separation within financial institutions, resolution mechanisms that work across borders. Failure must be survivable, not contagious. If an institution cannot fail, it is already a systemic threat. 6. Global liquidity without global bailouts. In crises, liquidity disappears faster than production. A global system must therefore provide emergency liquidity access, temporary stabilization mechanisms, clear exit conditions. But it must never guarantee permanent rescue. Liquidity support stabilizes the system. Solvency support distorts incentives. This distinction must be absolute. 7. Aligning finance with real economic activity. Finance should serve production, not dominate it. This requires penalizing excessive short-term speculation, favoring long-term investment horizons, linking credit availability to productive capacity. Economically, this redirects capital toward infrastructure, innovation, human capital, instead of asset inflation and rent extraction. 8. The core insight of Segment 6. Finance is the most powerful accelerator in the global economy. Unconstrained, it destabilizes everything. Overconstrained, it suffocates growth. The optimal system treats finance as essential, dangerous, structurally limited. With the financial core stabilized, the next question becomes existential. How does this system handle automation, AI, and productivity without collapsing demand? That is the focus of Segment 7. Technological progress has always disrupted labor. But automation and artificial intelligence introduce something fundamentally new: productivity gains that decouple output from human employment at scale. From an economic perspective, this is not a future problem. It is already underway. If unmanaged, it creates a paradox where the global economy becomes capable of producing more than ever, while simultaneously undermining the demand required to consume it. 1. The classical productivity paradox. In traditional economic models, productivity increases wages. Wages sustain consumption. Consumption sustains growth. Automation breaks this loop. When machines replace labor faster than new roles emerge, output rises. Labor income stagnates or falls. Aggregate demand weakens. This is not a failure of technology. It is a distribution failure embedded in the system. 2. Why new jobs will appear is not a sufficient answer. Historically, new industries absorbed displaced workers. But AI and automation differ in 3 key ways. They replace cognitive labor, not just physical labor. They scale instantly across borders. They concentrate ownership returns. Even if new jobs emerge, they require higher skill thresholds, employ fewer people per unit of output, capture less total income. At global scale, this creates structural underemployment, not temporary dislocation. 3. Productivity without income is systemically dangerous. An economy can survive low productivity with employment. It cannot survive high productivity without income distribution. When purchasing power collapses, markets lose clearing mechanisms. Investment returns decline. Financial instability rises. Paradoxically, technological success can trigger economic contraction. This is not a social problem first. It is a macroeconomic stability problem. 4. Decoupling income from employment. Carefully. A stable global system must partially decouple income from traditional employment without destroying incentives. This includes income floors tied to productivity, not labor hours. Automatic distribution mechanisms funded by system gains. Support for non-market but socially necessary work. Economically, this preserves consumption capacity, labor bargaining power, system legitimacy, without mandating universal sameness or eliminating markets. 5. Shifting taxation from labor to rents. In an automated economy, taxing labor becomes inefficient. A global system must gradually shift taxation toward economic rents, monopoly power, resource extraction, automation-driven surplus. This aligns revenue with value creation, not employment volume. From a technical standpoint, this stabilizes public finance while reducing labor distortion. 6. Global coordination to prevent a race to the bottom. Automation capital is mobile. Labor is not. Without coordination, firms shift profits to low-tax jurisdictions. States undercut each other. Public systems starve. A viable global system requires minimum standards for surplus capture, shared reporting frameworks, enforcement through market access. This is not global taxation, it is global constraint alignment. 7. preserving meaningful human economic roles. Not all valuable activity is productive in GDP terms. A stable system must protect space for care work, education, community resilience, cultural production. These roles stabilize societies, absorb human effort, preserve dignity and legitimacy. The economy exists to serve civilization, not to eliminate human relevance. 8. The core insight of Segment 7. Automation does not threaten the economy. Unmanaged automation does. A global economic system must ensure that productivity gains translate into purchasing power. Technological surplus circulates. Demand remains structurally supported. If this fails, no amount of efficiency will save the system. With productivity stabilized, the next challenge becomes planetary. How do we operate within ecological limits without collapsing growth? That is the focus of Segment 8. Every economic system eventually encounters a boundary it cannot negotiate with. At global scale, that boundary is physics. The Earth does not respond to prices, incentives, or ideology. It responds to material flows, energy gradients, and ecological thresholds. A viable global economic system must therefore answer a question earlier systems avoided. What does growth mean when extraction is no longer scalable? 1. The end of linear throughput growth. For most of human history, economic growth meant one thing: extract more, burn more, build more. This model worked because planetary limits were distant. They are no longer distant. At global scale, linear throughput growth now produces resource depletion, climate instability, ecosystem collapse. These are not externalities to be priced later. They are binding constraints that halt growth entirely if ignored. 2. Redefining growth as capability, not consumption. A sustainable global system must redefine growth away from material throughput and toward capability expansion. This includes growth in knowledge, health, longevity, system efficiency, cultural and social capacity. Economically, this shifts value creation from extraction to optimization and regeneration. The system grows by doing more with less, not by taking more. 3. Hard ecological caps, not soft targets. Environmental limits cannot remain aspirational. A viable system requires fixed carbon budgets, non-negotiable biodiversity thresholds, enforced pollution ceilings. These caps are set by science, not politics. Markets are permitted to operate within these limits, but never to redefine them. From an economic design perspective, this transforms the environment from an externality into a system boundary. 4. Markets within caps, efficiency without destruction. Once caps are established, markets regain legitimacy. Within ecological limits, markets allocate efficiently, discover low-impact innovations, reward resource productivity. Prices now reflect true scarcity, not artificial abundance created by free dumping. This preserves innovation while preventing planetary overshoot. 5. Circularity as an economic requirement. In a capped system, waste is no longer tolerable. Economic design must require material reuse, repairability, modular production, long product life cycles. Circularity is not a lifestyle choice. It is a macroeconomic necessity in a finite system. 6. Energy as the master constraint. All economic activity is downstream of energy. A global system must therefore prioritize low-entropy energy sources, invest in grid resilience and storage, price energy to reflect system stability, not short-term cost. Energy abundance without ecological damage becomes the primary growth enabler. This is not optional. It is foundational. 7. Preventing green growth illusions. Efficiency gains can create rebound effects. If efficiency lowers costs without caps, consumption increases. Total impact rises. Gains evaporate. A viable system prevents this by enforcing absolute limits, tracking total system impact, adjusting allowances dynamically. Growth is allowed, but only inside the envelope. 8. The core insight of Segment 8. The global economy cannot outgrow the planet, but it can outgrow its dependence on destruction. A stable system treats ecological limits as immovable, uses markets to optimize within them, measures success by resilience and capability. With planetary limits integrated, the final challenge emerges. How does this system survive shocks and remain legitimate during inevitable crises? That is the focus of Segment 9. No global economic system operates in equilibrium. Crises are not anomalies. They are structural features of complex systems. Financial crashes, pandemics, climate disasters, geopolitical ruptures. The question is not whether shocks will occur, but whether the system absorbs them or fractures under them. 1. Why crises are primarily political, not economic. Most economic systems do not collapse because resources vanish. They collapse because trust vanishes. When people believe the rules are unfair, losses are selectively imposed. Recovery favors insiders. Compliance breaks down. Markets freeze. Institutions lose authority. Exit becomes rational. Legitimacy, not efficiency, becomes the binding constraint. 2. The speed mismatch problem. Modern crises propagate faster than governance. Capital moves in milliseconds. Supply chains react in hours. Institutions respond in weeks. This mismatch turns containable shocks into systemic failures. A viable global system must therefore rely on automatic stabilizers, pre-authorized responses, rule-based crisis protocols. Discretion arrives too late. 3. Automatic stabilizers at global scale. Stabilizers must activate without debate. These include emergency liquidity triggers, temporary income support expansions, suspension of procyclical fiscal rules, rapid infrastructure and logistics coordination. From a technical standpoint, stabilizers reduce panic, maintain demand, preserve system continuity. They do not prevent crises, they prevent cascades. 4. Loss distribution as the moment of truth. Every crisis forces a choice. Who absorbs the losses? If losses consistently fall on workers, consumers, small states, while gains are preserved for large institutions, asset holders, systemically important actors, legitimacy erodes permanently. A viable system must enforce symmetry. Those who benefit most from expansion absorb proportionate risk. Systemically protected entities face stricter constraints. Bailouts come with automatic restructuring. This is not punitive. It is incentive preservation. 5. Transparency during crisis. Opacity accelerates panic. A global system must prioritize real-time disclosure, clear explanations of actions, visible rule adherence. Even bad news stabilizes systems when it is trusted. Uncertainty does not destroy legitimacy. Perceived deception does. 6. Preventing crisis exploitation. Crises create opportunities for consolidation and extraction. Without safeguards, market power increases. Inequality spikes. Political capture accelerates. A resilient system includes temporary anti-concentration rules, crisis period competition protections, sunset clauses on emergency powers. Emergency measures must be temporary by design, not by promise. 7. Social cohesion as economic infrastructure. Trust, cooperation, and shared sacrifice are not cultural luxuries. They are economic infrastructure. Systems with strong safety nets, predictable rules, fair loss sharing, recover faster, even from deeper shocks. Economically, cohesion reduces transaction costs when institutions are strained. 8. The core insight of Segment 9. A global economic system is judged not in growth years, but in crisis years. Legitimacy is earned when pain is shared visibly, rules are followed under stress, recovery is broad, not selective. A system that survives crises intact becomes self-reinforcing. With crisis resilience established, we arrive at the final question. What does success look like for a global economic system, and how does it evolve without collapse? Every economic system eventually fails, not because it is immoral, not because it is inefficient, but because it is static in a dynamic world. The final requirement of a global economic system is therefore not optimization, but adaptability. 1. Why collapse is the default outcome? Historically, economic systems collapse for the same reason biological systems do. They over-optimize for past conditions. They resist internal change. They ignore slow-moving signals. Growth hides fragility. Stability breeds complacency. By the time failure becomes obvious, it is already irreversible. 2. Designing for continuous adjustment. A viable global system must be built around permanent revision, not permanent rules. This means metrics that evolve with conditions, policies that adjust automatically, institutions that expect reform, not resist it. Economically, this shifts governance from control to calibration. The system does not seek equilibrium. It seeks balance while moving. 3. Avoiding ideological lock-in. The most dangerous belief in economics is that a system has been solved. When ideology hardens, evidence is ignored. Failures are rationalized. Adaptation slows. A resilient global system must treat markets as tools, states as coordinators, commons as constraints. None are sacred. All are conditional. 4. Distributed power as structural insurance. Centralized systems fail catastrophically. A viable global economy distributes decision-making, risk, authority. This ensures local experimentation, contained failures, diverse adaptation paths. Economically, diversity is not inefficiency. It is insurance. 5. Legitimacy as a renewable resource. Legitimacy must be regenerated continuously. This requires visible fairness, predictable rules, meaningful participation. When people understand why the system operates as it does and see themselves reflected in its outcomes, compliance becomes voluntary. No system survives on enforcement alone. 6. Progress without illusions. This system does not promise endless growth, perfect equality, permanent stability. It promises fewer catastrophic failures, slower accumulation of fragility, better recovery after shocks. This is not utopia. It is durability. 7. What success actually looks like. A successful global economic system is quiet. It does not dominate headlines. It does not require constant emergency intervention. It does not oscillate between boom and collapse. Its success is measured in absence of extreme crises, gradual improvement in welfare, long institutional memory. Stability becomes background noise, and that is the point. 8. The final insight. The best economic system for the global economy is not the one that maximizes output. It is the one that survives its own success, absorbs its own failures, evolves without breaking. An economy designed to evolve can afford imperfection. An economy designed to optimize cannot. And in a finite world, evolution is the only sustainable strategy.